This is a public open mic listening session for the Community Safety Review Committee's project. I am Shay Witzberger. We have many folks in the room who've been here before, so that's great. And we're gonna make some space for listening and sharing, and also potentially just visioning together. So I'm gonna start by saying we're gonna take participant stack by raising your little digital blue hand. I'm gonna sing a little song, and then we're gonna open it up from there. Emily can tell you a little bit more about our work after I sing a song to you. And this song is called Dark, 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 Dark. And it is related to our work because it is about reconceptualizing what is safe or dangerous, and about darkness as safety. So,
it was also my personal request.
Yeah, may or may not have had anything to do with Emily's request. Can you hear me okay? Dark, 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 did her part. Dark, 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 held the stars. Who shepherded the meteors as they rained down on baby Earth? Who shepherded the meteors that brought the water down to earth? Ooh. Dark, 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 did her part. Dark, 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 held up the stars. She worked the night shift, yeah. Who gave cover to the sea, aching, bursting to be free? Who gave cover to the people, fleeing, crossing, breaking free? Dark, 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 did her part. Dark, 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 held the stars. Sure, light's okay for doing things, but dark is where the wild birds sing. Light's alright, you think you see, but the stars never move, the firmament needs. Dark, 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 did her part. Dark, 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 held up the stars. Was there a light on in the womb? No. Will there be one on in the tomb? Dark's for lovers, secrets, dreams. Dark is where the wild things scream. Bet you weren't expecting that. Okay, welcome everyone to our public open mic night. Emily, do you want to give everyone a little taste of some human words instead of coyote screams?
Thank you for the coyote screams. I love them always, always. And I'm just going to throw a pitch in for checking out Shay on YouTube and the possum song. I have to.
That's got to be illegal. Don't look at that. Don't listen to her.
It's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing of yourself and your amazing music. Yes, so I'm just going to share a little bit about the project for folks who may not be sure what we're doing here, what this is about. And I'm actually going to read some words that Lana Devers, who is one of our committee members, wrote and read it at our last public forum on Monday with a couple of edits from me. So welcome and thank you for joining us tonight. We are a grassroots project and facilitated committee of the Brattleboro Select Board. We welcome you to this public opportunity to share your experiences with safety, danger, and harm, and policing, DCF, mental health interventions, and other ways that systems attempt to support safety in our community. In tonight's forum, we are openly welcoming creative forms of expression, so boldly and beautifully trailblazed by Shay tonight. And you're also welcome to share in any way that you would like. We will use your feedback to make recommendations about budget, policy, and next steps to the Brattleboro Select Board. Your experiences and feelings about safety, danger, harm, and community safety systems in Brattleboro are essential to this process. We invite those most impacted to be at the center of the project. That means that people with direct experience of these systems are welcome to share, and that folks from marginalized communities that experience increased system interaction are especially welcome to share. This includes members of our community who are BIPOC, LGBTQ+, survivors, sex workers, undocumented people, folks who have been arrested or incarcerated, and people who have experienced homelessness, drug use or substance use disorder, poverty, psychiatric labeling or disability, and more. While this forum's a public opportunity to share, it's simply only one of the many ways to make your voice heard. We have other forums that will remain confidential and de-identified, which we will share about at the end for anyone who's interested. And I'm going to pass the tech mic over to Laura, and I'm also going to share my screen so that Laura can read the agreements for us. First, I'm going to pin Janet's video and then share the agreements.
All right, thank you. We developed these agreements together as a committee, and we've been reading them at the start of each meeting just to keep them alive in our minds. So as I read them, I also invite you to hold these agreements tonight throughout this public forum. Be curious. Acknowledge that we come from different places and different life experiences. Center anti-racism as foundational in this process. Center anti-oppression, including work to avoid and end racism, sexism, transphobia, and homophobia, ableism, saneism, and all forms of oppression. Sanist oppression can look like pathologizing language, outing people's psychiatric labels, or engaging with people discriminatorily due to their psychiatric labeling or disability. Be kind whenever possible and use respectful language always. Use both and thinking instead of either or thinking whenever possible. Use whoa, ouch, oops to pause, acknowledge hurt, and take responsibility. Acknowledge or apologize when we hurt each other, even if we didn't intend harm. Hold space for probable good intentions while acknowledging that intention and impact both do matter. Welcome feedback and accountability from one another enthusiastically and give it generously. Acknowledge the contradictions. Hold a larger vision of big intergenerational world-changing work and honor realistically the short time frame and limited scope of this one effort inside of that long arc. Be generous and reverent of people's lived experiences, especially stigmatized experiences like incarceration, arrest, poverty, homelessness, abuse, and addiction. Check our biases individually and together. Work to attune to safety, value the quality of our human experiences together, and aim to make things safer while acknowledging that safety looks different for each person and is never guaranteed. Make change in our community through both the process and the production of outcomes. Hold responsibility of confidentiality with reverence and respect informed consent in how information shared is used.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you, Laura. And yes, in the comments or in the chat, Annalise is shouting out to Janet's performance of Shay's performance. and yes, I agree. And that's a good moment too to thank our ASL interpreters, Janet and Christine, who are here with us tonight, who have been here with us through this project. We're super grateful for you. Yeah. And a comment about the chat. A few ways that we've been using the chat is if you can't quite figure out how to get your raise hand feature up, if you want to say something, you can note in the comment in the chat that you'd like to speak. If you'd like someone to speak something for you, if you'd like something to be read for you, if you don't feel like speaking tonight, you can certainly put that in the chat and we will read it. And for tonight's meeting, if folks are sharing creative work like songs or poems or any other creative words, it would be helpful, and it was requested by our ASL interpreters, to please put the lyrics or the words of a poem, for example, into the chat if you would like to. That would help us allow more access to folks to what you're sharing. And before we jump into sharing, we're going to do, I usually do a grounding exercise at the beginning of our meetings, and we're going to do it a little bit differently tonight, a little bit more artistically oriented. So I have done this before in Zoom meetings. Now that we're all updating our skill set to include virtual meeting skills, this is a new fun one that I have found, and I'll share with you all. So, and this is the first time I'm facilitating it, so please bear with me. But what I am going to do, I have a Jamboard, which is actually an app of the Google Suite. So if you find yourself interested in this and want to learn more, you kind of like Google Hangouts or Google Meet or those things, Jamboard is one of the apps. And I'm going to put a link in the chat to the Jamboard that we're using for tonight. So on your own computer, you can go ahead and open up the link that I just put in the chat. If you'd like to, you don't have to do this, but if you want to, you can. And we'll all be joining the same document. And I'm going to pin Janet's video, and then I'm going to share my screen. So we're going to be able to, everything that we do on this Jamboard, you're going to be able to see. And one of the things I love about this is it assigns anonymous animal names to each person. So anything you do won't be able to be seen, it won't be seen who's doing what. So anonymous ferret just joined, which is exciting. And what we're going to do tonight for our grounding practice, if you want to, you don't have to do this, of course, is create a Jamboard, a visual collage of grounding tools. So as we move through this project, you know, it's been really important to note that the stories that we're sharing and hearing are difficult stories to hear, and that the listening project that we're doing here is reverent in that it's really listening to difficult stories from people's lives. And so, and trauma is a part of what of what we're talking about and discussing and hearing. And so what I want you to think about is like something that for you in your life brings a sense of grounding. So I'm going to demonstrate, and then we're going to create an art collage. So I'm going to demonstrate. I can, on this left-hand side, any one of us can use any of these icons, and I'm going to go ahead and go to the add image. And Google image search is embedded, which is super cool. And for me, one of my main grounding practices is to forest bathe, to bathe in pine trees. So I'm going to search for a picture of pine trees and find one that I like. Actually. And I'm going to add this picture to the Jamboard. All right, so now you all, if you'd like, you can go over to the add image, and then I'm gonna move it, and we're gonna create a collage together. So if you're in the document and you wanna participate, feel free. Again, nobody will know who's putting what on there. Feel free to add an image, Google search it, and pop it right in if you'd like. What is something that feels grounding to you or supports you in grounding? And if you're just joining us in the chat, there's a link to a Jamboard, which is also what you see on the screen. And what we're maybe doing is a collage where we can all participate. And that is if you're on a device that allows you to do that. So I recognize this isn't the most accessible practice that we've done. But we're putting pictures up that sort of speak to something that helps you feel grounded. So if you click on the link in the chat, it'll bring you to this Jamboard, and you can go to add image on the left-hand side, and you can Google image search for something that helps you feel grounded.
If you are on a phone or another device, or you just are having trouble doing that, you can feel free to say it out loud, and we can put it on there for you, or put it in the chat and we can put it on there for you.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. You're also welcome just to close your eyes or keep them open and think about something that helps you feel grounded. Yes, the link in the chat. Take a few more minutes to do this. It takes a little bit to get used to, and you can put more than one thing. So if you're in there and you want to add something else, feel free. And together we're creating a little collage. You can resize your image and move it around. Ooh, that bathtub looks amazing. You might need to resize images more. What's cool too about the Jamboard feature is that you can save it. And it ends up just being like a Google Doc in your folders. All right, we'll just take about 30 seconds more for this. If you want to participate, you can find another picture, find a picture, and add it to the collage that we're making here.
Emily, could you put the link in the chat again for folks who are just joining us?
Mm-hmm.
You can't see the previous chat from, oh, there it is.
Yeah.
You just did.
I did, yeah.
Perfect.
But I'm happy to do it more if needed.
We'll see if anyone joins after the last person joined.
Oh, look at that. Little cute cat.
Oh.
Oh my gosh. And I think I'm realizing as I'm watching this and you know, I think in a lot of ways, the things that make us feel grounded also might have some relation to the things that make us feel safe too, or at least grounded. There may be some relationship between the quality of groundedness and the quality of safety. So one of the things we've been learning and at the beginning of our project is, you know, that people have different definitions and experiences of what safe even means, which is why we didn't want to define safety for people at the outset of the project. All right, thank you all so much for this. I'm just gonna move this, but yeah, for this beautiful collage we made together.
So we have trees and fire and desert mountains and wooded mountains and people holding hands and
Dancing.
waterfalls and dancing and multiple cats in and out of masks. A foresty bathtub. A meditator in nature. A beautiful mural. Some leaves.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you all for your participation. All righty. Annalise, would you take it away?
Hello, everyone. I'm Annalise Griffin. I'm a member of the Community Safety Review Team. I use she, her pronouns, and I want to welcome you to this open mic and community listening session tonight. I will start off by giving you some logistical stuff. Everyone, we generally say about 5 minutes to share, but I think, you know, we should have plenty of time tonight because this goes to 8. So I think Emily will hold time if we need to do that. But at this point, I don't think we have to worry about that too much. To indicate that you would like to share, this was a new thing to me, so I will walk you through it because I found that really helpful. If you go to the bottom of your screen and you see the participants button, right now it says 21 participants. If you hover over it with your mouse, click on that and a box will pop up. And there's a couple of different things you can do. On the far left of that box, there's a little blue hand. It says raise hand. Click on that and Maya will be keeping track of folks and in the chat, letting you know who will be next up. The other thing is in the chat, if you have a piece of visual art or interpretation that you would like to share with us tonight, if you click on the chat, you can see there is a little box that said on the right that says file. If you click on that, you can upload something from your computer and then Emily or Shay can share that and we can all look at it, which works really well. So those are the logistical things. The sort of bigger picture things are, I want to remind you this is a public forum. So everyone, there's no expectation of privacy here. And we're going to be sharing some things that could be difficult, hard to hear, hard to talk about. And so we are going to hold the space reverently. We're going to listen carefully, but these are things that are going out to the public. That's for your knowledge. And also, if you're sharing a story that has other people in it, as many stories do, you want to make sure that you have those people's consent to identify them if you're going to use their names. And if you don't, not to sort of, you know, share their experience without their consent, since this is a public forum. To that end, as you may have seen in my screen earlier, it's Saturday, we're all at home. There are young people about underfoot, some of them naked, in the case of mine. And so if you're gonna share something that maybe you wouldn't share in front of a young person in your own life, give us a little heads up so we can put headphones on, push them to watch a movie, that kind of thing, leave the room. Or if there's something that you feel like the rest of us it's a particularly tough or tender thing, just give us a little bit of a heads up in advance. And finally, we're just so grateful to hear your stories. This is the second one of these we've done, and the first one was really successful and really just an immense expression of community solidarity and listening. And we're just so grateful to have you here and to be here to hear what you have to say. So raise your blue hand, please. And we're excited to hear what you have to say tonight.
Thanks, Annalise. I also want to name that Emily and I are available for emotional support. If this hearing from folks brings stuff up for you, you can private message us in the chat or email our email that I'm going to put in the chat, and we can be in touch with you about what kind of support would feel best to you if needed. And I'm so grateful. This space is also, again, just for your own experiences with safety, danger, harm, policing, DCF involvement, mental health intervention or treatment. Also, it could be about visions for what you think a safer community for everyone could look like, or like ways that you imagine in an ideal world, Brattleboro would be as safe as possible for everybody. So space for all kinds of sharing. And I howled like a coyote. So please feel free to share whatever you need to share, because that seal has been broken. And it's obviously a welcoming space for many kinds of expression.
So I think with that, we're hoping people are ready to raise their hands, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Please feel free to start getting in line.
Laura, would you like to share?
Oh. All right. And I've been the note taker for our group, and I can't talk and type at the same time. So I definitely, Kelsey, you might have to capture this. But my story with police goes back to when I was pretty young. I was 19, and I had just fallen in love with a woman for the first time, and I got a call from a friend that another one of our friends was not feeling safe. And so we went sort of late at night to go rescue this friend. Her car broke down. She was like in some random auto mechanic place. And so we went and we like got gas at some point. This is not in Brattleboro, Vermont. And when we got gas, I definitely feel like, don't totally remember exactly, but it was like young love. And I'm pretty sure that I like held her hand in some way and like did like something affectionate. And there were two police officers who were at the gas station who then proceeded to follow us and pulled us over for crossing the white line when we got off at the gas station, which I definitely feel like was profiling like two 19-year-old like queer women. And I had a really awful experience. I felt totally unsafe. I was like separated from my girlfriend. She was like interrogated by one officer. I was interrogated by the other. There was unwanted touch. It was, I basically let them search my car and ended up being arrested for having like extremely small bit of cannabis at 19. And I remember that I was taken in the cop car, handcuffed, the whole thing, brought to jail, and my girlfriend wouldn't let me go alone. She was like way too freaked out by the way that these police officers had interacted with us and did not feel safe letting me do that. So she demanded to be arrested for absolutely no reason, which they did. And then they put us into 2 separate cop cars and drove us to the jail. So in all of that, you know, when I see police officers, I'm still terrified. I was 19 years old and I still get a fear response, and feel so grateful that I am white and I drive a Prius with kids and I'm never pulled over in this town. And so I feel like when I hear people's stories and listen, I am to this, like what safety means is not having high schoolers going into a building where they're going to have a trauma response when they see officers at the door. It's like, I feel like I don't know entirely how this has impacted me now if I was in trouble, but I definitely know recent to those years, like there's no way I would have called the police if I felt unsafe. And I think that so I'm trying to figure out like what are solutions where that would have helped me in that situation. What are solutions if I still had the like terror response that I had? I think that's pretty much it. But I have really appreciated everyone in this committee sharing different things about their experiences. And I also just feel like we've created a very cool, safe space here, which feels good. So thank you.
Thank you, Laura, for sharing your story with us.
Thanks, Laura. For folks who aren't in the space very much, the only kind of response we're really welcoming to folks' stories is thank yous or appreciation or just validation of that. We're not going to be like correcting anybody's narratives or challenging anybody's own experiences to the best of our abilities. And I'm so grateful, Laura, that you shared. Is there anyone else who has any visions or experiences that they want to share into the space? Bravely. Malika?
Malika, welcome.
Hi, thanks. I'm on both the phone and the computer because of my internet, so I can at least see you all, but sorry you can't see me. Yeah, I'm Malika. I use she, her pronouns. I live in Dummerston and work in Brattleboro, and I haven't had a chance to pop on to any of the listening sessions yet, so I don't have like anything particularly, I don't have anything prepared or like a, I don't know, anything really open mic-y, but I'm happy to share about, I guess, like my vision and yeah, also I guess maybe some of my experiences that have led me to have some ideas about what might be possible in Brattleboro, particularly around like how we can support each other when in like emotional or psychic or social distress. And I'm actually holding, I have on my desk next to me this book called On Our Own by Judy Chamberlain, which was written in the 1970s. And I was just flipping through it and looking at all these notes that I have and like things that are underlined, and I'm so struck by how much of the critique of psychiatry that Judy and other psychiatric survivor activists articulated literally like 50 plus years ago are so spot on today, and like how incredibly little has changed, and how the solutions that our movement envisioned then are still the solutions that we need largely. And one of the problems I think that exists in Brattleboro and beyond that needs a solution is that there are incredibly few resources for people to go to when experiencing emotional distress and like needing to talk to someone or be with someone, besides resources that are carceral, that are like you can't you really can't have like a voluntary interaction with, because there's always the possibility that if you decide, actually, you know what, I don't know that I really want to be in this conversation. I don't know that I actually want this kind of support. There's always the possibility that those systems, the systems that we have, the mental health system that we have, is not necessarily primarily about like showing up to support people to get through a difficult time, but is largely about determining what mechanisms of control a person might need, or if they don't need them. So there's no like interaction with mental health services without also some degree of assessment or screening. And for me, and I think for many other people who've experienced how harmful those interventions can be, that just makes fundamentally those services unsafe and inaccessible. But even if I did feel safe, like accessing like crisis or something like that, and I have in the past, the support has literally been about like, well, are you suicidal or homicidal? If not, then like, good luck. If so, come to the emergency room. And so unless you happen to be a person with like a fair amount of social privilege to have like sufficient support networks in your, in your friends, your family, whatever, that's the option. Like, good luck, or come to the emergency department, come to the hospital, go through a screening, or perhaps, the police show up. So something I've been talking a lot about lately, and I guess for a long time, is the need for there to be sort of like true alternatives at each level of possible intervention, or like levels of intervention of the mental health system. The first level being like crisis response. Crisis response right now is either you bring yourself into the emergency department or into like a clinic setting to be screened, or the police and perhaps a social worker come to you. And the alternative that I think is so needed there is that there is a team that can respond to people mobily in the community that's connected to dispatch instead of police or crisis, that's like run by people who have themselves been through, extreme states or a lot of, emotional distress, and that there's a place for people to go instead of the emergency department. There's drop-in space that's like a space for people to freak out or be in crisis, and that there's not the threat of forced drugging or restraint, which people may not be aware is something that happens very frequently in emergency departments. I've witnessed it multiple times. It could be happening at this very moment at BMH, in fact. And then there's also, if people need to sort of stay somewhere else besides their home for, a while, that there's a place to go that's not literally a prison, which is what the retreat is, where people are locked in and witnessing and being threatened with the violence of seclusion and restraint and involuntary drugging there as well, which I shared with, I sent along to Emily and Shay a while ago some data about seclusion and restraint at the retreat and I'd encourage others to access that. Maybe I can put a link in the chat or something, but it's extremely high numbers. So I think the alternative there is having respite, peer respites, where people can just go and be in a home-like environment and get support. These things are like so incredibly simple, and they're actually not even that hard to make happen, but they don't exist. And the consequence of that is that people experience violence and enter systems where they die 25 years sooner on average, and after which they are 20 or more times more likely to kill themselves, or they don't get any support at all unless they're privileged enough to have those resources themselves. Thanks so much for letting me share.
Thank you, Malika, for sharing your stories and all of these visions and as you're saying, very simple potential alternatives. Thank you. And if you would like to share your experiences with safety, danger, and harm, or your visions for safety or alternatives to police response, feel free to raise your blue hand if you would like to.
Hi, my name is Maya. I'm a member of the committee. I just want to quickly share that in the course of my work as a social worker in this community, both at the Brattleboro retreat and currently at HCRS, that I've seen and experienced a lot of what Malika just described, and I could not agree more strongly that we need some sort of respite alternative for people to access when they're in crisis. It is absolutely sickening and very difficult to try to keep people safe within the system that we have right now. There are just so few options, and the alternatives go from like pretty much like very low levels of support to extreme and very carceral levels of support. So yeah, I just, I've been thinking about that quite often in the course of my work recently, and I appreciate, Malika, your sharing that. And Hannah will be next.
Thank you, Maya.
Oh, hi. I think, figured it out. Hi, I'm Hannah. Sorry about that, little technical difficulties. I guess initially, I can't really agree more on the importance of having a specific department set up for mental health crises and not just universally sending police with a gun to people where that is literally the last thing that they need is someone to come and make them feel like their environment is even more hostile than what it was before they arrived. That's not the effect that we want the person that's there to help them to have. I guess initially I want to thank all of you for setting this up and providing, sorry, my cat's in the background, and providing this really just safe and open and inclusive environment for everyone to sort of share their experiences. Shay asked earlier if anyone had a vision, and we do. I'm a researcher with Brattleboro Common Sense, which is a nonprofit out of Brattleboro. And we've been working on the Safe Policing Project, which is a proposal that aims to largely remove firearms from most officers that are performing their regular duties. So officers that would be policing like the neighborhood, like walking down the sidewalk, wouldn't be wearing a firearm regularly, or a traffic stop, they wouldn't be wearing a firearm. Situations that just, or schools, like I'm not going to mention them by name, but the person that spoke on Monday talked about how they feel so uncomfortable and unsafe around the officers at the school who are there to provide them with safety. And one of the things that they mentioned that made them feel most uncomfortable was the firearm, was the gun on their hip, that for a lot of people in the community, that doesn't feel threatening, because for a lot of people in the community, police officers feel like they're there to protect them and make them feel safe. But then for a lot of other people in the community, they don't feel that way around officers. Officers do not make them feel safe. They make them feel unsafe. They make them feel threatened. They make them feel afraid. They make them feel anxious, stressed. And firearms only exacerbate that. They only make that problem worse. And we see that with the firearm stimulus effect, which even if we don't realize it, it creates some sort of an emotional response. It could just be your heart rate rises, or I don't know, you start to sweat. Your face becomes red because you're a little bit tense, or whatever. Any sort of past experience or trauma might make you feel uncomfortable around the officer. And then the officer reads that, and then you read their hostility or slight aggression based on what you portrayed earlier. And then it just spirals and it becomes this really hostile and negative experience. And what we found with all the research that we did was that a lot of this comes down to the firearm being visible on their hip, which is, I guess, what we would like to see gone. And I think that I'm not a member of the community that feels more uncomfortable around police. I'm lucky to not feel that way. But I do feel that people in our community should feel like they're a part of our communities. I don't feel that a community should feel like a police state for some people and like a community for others. That's just, it's not a community when half of the people that live there don't feel that they belong there. Yeah, if you want to find out more, we have a website. It's a little wooden, but it's under construction. And yeah, Brattleboro Common Sense.org. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Hannah, and you're welcome to put the website link in the chat if you would like. Thank you. I would like to share a little bit unless anybody else wants to share. I'll leave a moment here, and if there's a blue hand, I'd love to hear from that blue hand. But it seems like there's a moment to pause. So, you know, I thought about whether or not to share and have come to the decision that I would like to, mostly because my life experience, given my privilege, which includes my white skin, and also the privilege of having a family growing up that had a lot of, a large extended family. I grew up in a family where in my childhood, there were periods of fairly significant neglect due to substance use. And my parents happened to be also part of families that had a lot of siblings. And so there was a lot of built-in support where we would go and live with an aunt, usually when one of my parents had to go to rehab, or there was days where our needs weren't getting met. And as I got older and understood that not every family had those safety nets, and then as I entered the system as a professional, it became really clear to me that there's actually a notable lack of police and DCF response in my family experience. And And I began to understand more about why that was, including my my privileges. I grew up in a neighborhood of my community that wasn't policed. There were neighborhoods that were policed. And it was definitely something I was living with as a secret in my school life and in my social life, so that, you know, people didn't find out, and therefore, so that the police and DCF weren't called. That was a very intentional, something we really didn't want happening in our family. And we were successful in that. And I'm very grateful that we didn't have DCF involvement in my life. And I know that we could have. But I would also like to share, you know, I have worked in Brattleboro, lived and worked in Brattleboro for about 11 years as a mental health professional and currently a psychotherapist. But I worked for a long time supporting folks in mental health programs. And I also thought about whether or not to share this, but I've decided to share it because I think, as Malika was sharing, I'm not sure that folks, I wanted to share this publicly because I'm not sure that folks really sort of, I think maybe a lot of us don't quite realize how prevalent the use of involuntary restrictions and medication is in, not even just in the retreat, but in our local ER. And so in my career here in Brattleboro, there have been many, many times that I have physically supported someone in the ER, been present with somebody, because one of the things that happens when somebody has been identified as where there's been an involuntary hospitalization order put on somebody is that until there is an open bed at a psychiatric hospital unit, they are very often kept in the ER for days. And so I would visit with folks every day while they were there. And there was one particular situation that, of course, this isn't my experience, although my creative expression tonight might be tears, because this is a very hard, it felt really unsafe to me as well. And I recognize that didn't happen to me. And I want to note that as well. But there was a person who I was supporting who had been in a type of restraint at the ER that resembled a straitjacket type restraint, where the person's arms were restrained like this, so they had no mobility in their arms for 3 days. And they were on the third day, and I had been there every day with them. And the person when I was sitting there with them, the person asked the sheriff who was sitting outside and the nurse who was caring for the person for help to use the bathroom. Up until this point, they were only allowed to use a bedpan. This person who was experiencing emotional crisis, mental health and emotional crisis. And this was the third day where they had only been allowed to use a bedpan. And they asked to use the bathroom, and both of those professionals supporting the person not only denied that request, but very rudely denied that request. And I attempted to advocate for the person, and I asked, the person then asked me to help, and I agreed to help. The nurse tried to stop me many times. I refused, and I supported the person in using the bathroom. And then and it was very emotional. We were both very emotional, and it was extremely traumatic for this person. And we were able to negotiate some time for the person to be without the shackles after that experience, which was successful. But I do want to share that we aren't listening to people in those moments when we are putting them in shackles and only letting them use bedpans for 3 days. And when we are not allowing them to advocate for themselves, and another professional person has to be there in order to advocate for them, for their safety and for their humanity. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Emily. I think it's safe to say that Emily and I have had many conversations recently about the role of holding people's intense stories, and And we've been holding a lot of intense stories from people in different spaces. And we're so grateful for folks to share. And also, I want to just honor that many people have said, why do we have to share our trauma over and over again for people to listen to us? Why is there a buffer between my story and the people in power who are making decisions, that's you, in between, to stop them from having to listen to it directly? And why is it always the onus of people who are going through trauma and pain to share and share and share and share before pain can be listened to and turned into change? And I just want to honor that in this space, that it's hard.
Yeah, thanks for noting that, Shay. Anna, we'd love to hear from you next.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm sorry I don't have my camera on. I just was teaching all day, and sometimes I just need a break.
No apology needed at all.
Okay,
That's
thank you. I
totally
don't,
fine.
as a teacher, I also really enjoy people's cameras on, so that's why I apologize for that. So I'm just going to speak about the visioning. Is that okay? I think I'm a little, yeah, that's cool. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I am in public health, and I teach UMass students down at UMass, or I just said that, at UMass, and I'm a student myself. I also have a background in working with people that have been in crisis, specifically around intimate partner violence. And so I'm coming at it right here from thinking about public health and a lot of the stuff that I do with my students. But first, I want to say that policing is a public health concern, and that police brutality is a public health issue. And in fact, the American Public Health Association came out with a pretty good statement this summer around how police violence was a public health issue. And I think the part around visioning is, when I think about health, I often talk to my students about how do we get health for all, and that public health is very much about population health and our collective well-being. And I think that one of the pieces that we fight, all of us, is that we are so entrenched in this deep individualism, and it affects the collective well-being of all of us. And I think the response to COVID is, of course, a prime example of this and what is happening here in the United States. That there's no, I mean, there's of course the huge, massive mismanagement of it, but there's also this individualism that I think manifests in lots of ways. And one of the, so I guess one thing around visioning for me is, how do we continue to etch that individualism out of ourselves for our collective well-being of each other? And Brattleboro is such a great community to keep pushing at that. I walked down the street the other day, and it's the beauty of a small town, is seeing people you know and seeing how they are, and that it's also, I'm also a part of Brattleboro Solidarity, and some of us had led a couple of years ago these conversations around panhandling and poverty in this town. And one of the things I always said is, like, and I think Malika said this, is like, it's so simple sometimes. It's just saying, like, hey, how's it going? And I think that I've learned this a lot. Actually, I have to credit like the training I've had around intimate partner violence, is that sometimes all someone needs is to ask them, how are you doing? And just saying hello. And I always say this when people ask me about my work in violence, is that it's something that's so stigmatized and like not our business or whatever. And I always say we need to make it our business. It is our business. We need to be in each other's business. And I don't mean that in like, I'm all up in like, well, what's happening, whatever. It's like, no, it's about just taking care of each other and saying, hey, and how are you doing? And that can go so far. I think it really can, from people who are having some mental health crisis to just someone who's having a bad day. And it can help with mitigating a police interaction, I think. But I also think it takes courage. And I think that we need that, and we need to help each other with that. Okay, I think that's all I have. Thank you. And thank you for putting this on.
Thank you, Anna, for sharing your visions. Thank you so much. Malika, would you like to add?
Yeah, is that all right?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I really appreciated you sharing what you shared, Emily, and like, sharing, I think, specific situations is really helpful for people to like get a picture of what is actually happening, because it's hard to sort of communicate about otherwise, because this violence that happens to people in the psychiatric system is so sort of removed from the public view, and that's, I think one of the reasons why so few people are sort of at all concerned or politicized about it. And also, wherever we experience this violence, we're not allowed to have our phones, so we can't even like video what's happening to us. And there aren't bystanders as there are with police who can sort of document it. So and those of us who are there, we're bound by HIPAA, so it's really hard to tell the stories in a way that respects people's privacy. And so I often run into that dilemma of like, I want to tell you the details of what happened because this illuminates a lot, and it's hard to do so. But one situation that I want to share briefly, that feels okay to do so, not identifying. I think it's important because I think when people think of these situations where people are in restraints or in seclusion, which is just a different lingo for talking about solitary confinement. They're so often it's not because there has been actual harm that's happened or there's actual danger posed. So often it's a punishment of noncompliance. And one example where I saw that play out so clearly was I was in the emergency department supporting one person, and there was someone else in the next room over who was also there on like psychiatric hold, was not there voluntarily, and the nurses were asking this person to take off their clothes and change into a Johnny. Also, like this is like a pretty heavy story, as they usually are, and the person didn't want to. Of course, they're like, I'm staying in my clothes, and then there's the repeated ask and the explanation that we need to know that you don't have anything dangerous on you, which is not about a specific concern related to that person. It's just like routine. If you're a psych patient, very frequently in most places you'll be asked to change out of your normal clothes and in many cases actually be subjected to a full body search. I've experienced that at the Brattleboro retreat as a child. I had to stand in front of multiple adults naked as they marched down on a chart, like any sort of marks on my body. You turn around, look, I've never been in prison, but what I had seen on TV of someone going into prison. So this person had been asked to take off their clothes and put on a Johnny for the safety of the nurses, and the person didn't want to, and just very, very quickly, just they're non-compliant. They didn't do anything at all except not be willing to take off their clothes, and and then all of a sudden there's like a swarm of people around them, like restraining them and giving them an injection, and yeah, the person was screaming and obviously felt extremely tortured, and the person I was supporting then became very upset and tried to intervene to help this person, and then they were like being restrained by the staff, and then all of a sudden there was a needle right behind this person as they were like trying to get away, and I felt very helpless, but I was just like, can you just give them a minute? And so they did, and the person didn't get the injection. But that story is so so traumatizing just to witness, and it's it's so heavy. But I think it's a really important situation to share, because the narrative of like mentally ill people as dangerous is so strong. And so when you see someone or hear about someone being subjected to that kind of intervention, like you might be inclined or conditioned to trust that there's good cause for that, and that's actually protecting people. And I've been in the system for a while, and I've not yet seen that. I haven't seen that scenario yet where that's actually protecting the public. I've only seen ever in my, I started getting treatment at 14, and I continued right from there up to now. At some point transitioned from being a patient to working in the system, and in that whole time, I just haven't seen it. I haven't seen the danger posed by these supposedly dangerous people who I see being hurt constantly. So I think that's important context as well. Yeah, thanks for letting me share that. And I guess too, I'll just add that I would love for there to be funding for other kinds of support that's not through the system, because I work at HCRS, and I manage peer support services and have some really, really important and valuable conversations with other providers who work there, who are in clinical roles and crisis roles, psychiatrists, and people are pretty willing to engage in conversations about these things and see a lot of the problems, but there's not a lot of potential to do anything radically different in the system given the way that it's structured. So I think it makes a lot of sense for me for towns and state governments to sort of separately fund some other resources. So I hope perhaps that'll be something that might someday be possible in Brattleboro.
Big thanks, Malika, for sharing.
Thank you.
Kelsey.
Whew. I just want to say thank you so much to Laura for the note-taking last time. It's a really difficult thing to capture these stories and try to do them justice. So it's hard. But I did want to quickly share, it's relevant to what people are talking about right now, and I need to be really careful in how I speak of it. But it's extremely, I feel like it's important to share. I can't ask the person's permission to share. The person's no longer with us, and but it's something that I think our community was very much touched by. So I'm gonna be really careful in how I speak of it. But in a previous role I was in as a service provider, I had a client that I was supporting, and that person was really, really struggling for several weeks. And that person had had many experiences in the retreat. And this person was really clear that it was not safe and needed support. But the idea of going to the retreat was worse in this person's mind. So we did some work together around figuring out, we both hit this person's experience and my experience working and supporting both people as clients and at certain points, family members, knowing that maybe if we found out there was a bed open somewhere else, at the exact moment walking into the ER, potentially I could advocate for that person to get that bed. And with doing that work and finding out that yes, there was a bed open somewhere else, this person was willing to go through the screening process that this person was so terrified of doing because did not want to end up at the retreat. And for a lot of reasons that was their own, right? I'm not judging whether or not they were valid, but they're that person's reason. So sat for many hours in that little tiny room without even a bed, right? And I was there all day, voluntarily at this point. And then the end of my day, I extended it as long as I could. I had to leave and I made sure that my organization agency's on-call person was connected to the ER, made sure that, you know, the people behind the desk had our on-call number, did everything I could do and promised that person that I or another person from our agency would be checking in. This person went through the screening. I should backtrack, went through the screening while I was still there and confirmed. I made sure it was confirmed that the bed was open at the other facility and that it was looking like we just had to wait for transport to arrive. So that was confirmed before I left. Just waiting for transport to arrive, bed is open. I spoke again on the phone to the other center. Yes, we have a bed open. As long as that person gets here, you know, relatively soon, the bed will be open. All we have to do is wait for transport to arrive. So the next morning I called that other center, you know, with a release already signed, assuming that my client was going to be there and they didn't know who I was talking about. So I called the ER, that person was still there. And over the course of the night had gone from voluntary to involuntary because decided, you know, was terrified, was there alone and no supports. This person didn't have family supports that they felt comfortable being present. So I went back to the ER. You know, then now there's an officer, or I can't recall, whether it's a security guard or police officer, whatever the routine is, there was an officer outside of the room. And this person was absolutely at this point just powerless, given up, totally checked out. While I was there, transport came, ambulance came. This person was brought to the retreat. And I asked why, what happened to the bed, there's no bed open at the other facility. So now this person went from voluntary, beds open, where this person felt safe, to going to the place that just absolutely, you know, took weeks to get to where we were. So went to the retreat. And the next day I went to the retreat to visit this client. This person was in the secluded unit. And I didn't get any answers as to exactly why. But ended up, you know, gone from voluntary to involuntary, now in the secluded unit. That was on a Friday. And over the weekend, that person was discharged. And directly from being discharged, that person ended their life. So, that was a very significant experience for me. There's a lot more to that story and that individual's background. But what really stood out to me is that, you know, this person recognized I'm not safe. I need help. I need to go somewhere. But based on my experiences, I would rather deal with this hell alone on the streets or in my home than go to the retreat, and promise that could go somewhere else, and it didn't happen. So anyway, I think there's the breakdown of the systems and what you're all talking about. Other alternatives are so very important, and to listen to people. I don't believe that at any point that person was dangerous to others. And again, my agency's on call 24 hours a day. No one was ever notified. No one was notified when that person was when it went from voluntary to involuntary. No, our agency wasn't called. Nobody was called when suddenly, oh, the bed at the other center is no longer available and we're going to have to go in the other direction. Even though I had been there advocating, sharing this information, being so clear with everyone possible. And we were not notified any step along the way. So, you know, I'm not blaming any one individual, but what you're all talking about absolutely is so needed. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Kelsey.
Thank you, Kelsey. Does anyone else have any experiences or visions that you would like to share for safety in Brattleboro?
Bob, take it away.
I'll try. Sometimes my my audio isn't too good here, so so I'm walking in Brattleboro a couple of years ago. It's I think April thereabouts, and walking past a building, and there's someone laying on the steps of the building. So I went up and said, excuse me, do you need medical attention? And the woman said, don't call the police. I said, okay, so what's going on? So started explaining about how she'd been released from the retreat, and that she had these papers or something about going to some sort of a follow-up place, mentioned the name of a facility in New Hampshire. And we talked a little bit, but I said, well, I don't know what else I can do. I called the police social worker, and police social worker said that she had talked to the woman for about an hour and a half, and the only thing that she could offer her was readmission to the retreat. Now, I should say that the discharge from the retreat occurred almost simultaneous with the closing of the emergency shelter that happens around that time of the year. And a little bit more of the detail of that, which I learned later, is that that person had already been arrested, and probably more than once, because the arrest that was on record was an arrest for violation of conditions, and the violation of condition was not to drink alcohol. So just taking that minor story and parsing this out a bit, so you've got a court, which is a state judiciary, so that's a state function, imposing a condition on someone who apparently has a problem with alcohol, not to drink alcohol as a condition. If that were a civil contract, I think a lawyer might say that that's a contract impossible of performance. And then to arrest someone for violating a condition that's impossible of performance. So you get town police, state judiciary, state's attorney, all involved in what's fundamentally not a police matter. And not having an alternative that makes sense. We talked earlier, or someone talked earlier about having a place, and there's a place in Vermont called Elysium, I think, but it has like very limited bids. There was a move now my sound is going. Are you still hearing me? No? There was a move a few years ago about having a detox bed in this town, but there was no funding for staffing. So the staffing would have to be volunteers. How much money did we spend to discharge someone to the retreat to no housing with a condition that's impossible of performance that has to be enforced through police work? Is there a better way to spend that money?
Thank you for sharing that, Bob.
Thank you for sharing, Bob. And I think just for a little bit of education too for folks that I think possibly the function that you're speaking of is called an order of non-hospitalization, which is the mental health system's essentially diversion from hospitalization program, which sort of further illustrates how jail-like hospitalization is. But the order of non-hospitalization function, which allows the Department of Mental Health to place conditions that can be then enforced on people in order to discharge them from a hospital. Yeah, it's a very widely used function. Yeah.
This condition was imposed by a Wyndham District Court judge pursuant to an arrest, probably for disorderly conduct. And then the arrest was for a violation of that condition, which was then imposed. So it was done through the criminal process.
Yeah. Okay, good to know. And also, it is also done by the Department of Mental Health through that process as well.
I was gonna say, what does it mean if the paired processes are so similar that you could mistake one for the other? When, as I think Malika pointed out, very often in these situations, there's no behavior that breaks any law that's happening. People have concern, but there's no behavior very often that's breaking any law that leads people to have these conditions that are very similar to the conditions of someone who's in the criminal system. Both happen around here quite a lot. And it looks like Malika just said that in the chat as well. Is there anyone else who would like to share before we take a brief break? A fiver. We're nearing the middle of our allotted time. There's no one burning to share. No hands. If you're on the phone, oh, there's a hand. Good. Tara, if that hand is purposeful, you can please feel welcome to share.
Yeah, let me just, I take my video off. I put it on. Hi, how are you all tonight? Tara O'Brien. I'm resident of Brattleboro. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I also work at the Root Social Justice Center. Thank you for creating yet another space, a creative one for people to speak, feel comfortable in. I also want to thank those who spoke before me tonight with your brave words for us to listen and learn from. I'm one of the ones who spoke. I wanted to thank Shay for showing up at a few of the root programming, so people could speak with privacy in those settings. I spoke in privacy. I shared my story there because I didn't have consent of the then minor who was part of that story. And I also at that time spoke about the fact that the onus of responsibility is repeatedly on us. We're sharing our stories of victimization by institutions, by structural racism, structural oppression. When is it enough? And I speak from experience when I say that. I am looking through old newspaper clippings from 2004 when residents disclosed profiling incidents that we the Alana organization, which I was a part of in 2004, conducted a survey of majority of our minority households, and overwhelmingly then people were asking for a review board with a police civilian review board with teeth. That didn't happen. You know, I was part of the Civil Rights, our Vermont committee to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. We had seminal work on racial profiling in Vermont at that time. What came out of that is these words and now that cannot be used, according to our president, who on September 22nd of this year came out with Executive Order 13950 on combating race and sex stereotyping, which trainers using federal funds cannot use the words systemic racism, unconscious bias, critical race theory, white privilege, positionality. These are all key words that really we need to use in trainings with folks working within institutions to have an understanding of their positions in their interactions with people who are in vulnerable interactions with people with power. So that's a challenge that those of us working to combat oppression in all forms are up against if that executive order isn't turned around come January. Just to contextualize this. So part of me, I'm really drawn to what kind of I'm going to step back, excuse me. Just over 1,000 folks voted for this president who made this executive order. So he didn't happen in a vacuum. You know, there's a reason why that order was implemented, you know, not to address these issues at their core. When we talk about the systemic oppression, these are the reason these systems exist. You know, we have to get to the core of it. We talk about systemic problems within these institutions. So, you know, when we talk about visioning, again, we need to talk about education. So if we're going to be putting money if you're going to be making any suggestions and visioning, please towards education, not only those working in the institutions, but our community members. Again, on visioning, I spoke about this a little bit with Shay in one of our groups the other night. I love for monies to go towards neighborhood associations, community groups, you know, neighborhood associations that people create a sense of belonging so that people aren't calling institutions or 911 or, you know, at any sense of perceived danger, you know. So neighbors know neighbors. I have an experience, I lived in Japan for 10 years as an adult, and, you know, those neighborhood associations were active. Each household had your turn being part of the organization that ran the meetings. Every household in the neighborhood took a turn being on that committee. You know, those were so well integrated into local politics so that people had a sense of belonging in their towns. I'd like to envision just active neighborhood associations. I'd love to envision active community resource. You know, in Japan, we have police boxes in neighborhoods where there's a police officer right in a neighborhood. I'd like to envision a resource box, you know, or like a little mini office where folks, you know, the folks who service those with who are at need, who are, you know, right now, I know there are efforts right now going with groundworks, you know, they're in the streets, on the grounds, just making connections so that there's just a sense of community. Those are some things I like to see when we're talking about envision. I just, you know, education is a huge part of it. If we're gonna change these systems, it's not only changing from within, but it's everybody who interacts with those systems. Thank you. Check.
Thanks for sharing, Tara.
Thank you, Tara. Thanks for being here.
I'm tired. I've been involved in this since 2004, took a break. We don't, how long is it going to take? How long is it going to take?
Yeah. Yeah, I wanna uplift that as well, and as Shay said earlier, and just say one of the themes that we've been hearing throughout this listening project is the emotionality around what it means to like have to keep sharing stories over and over again and not see that manifest into anything different. Business as usual continues, even though there's these continual efforts. So we have been, folks are really imploring us as a committee to do what we can with this piece of work. And so I hear that call, and I also just acknowledge so deeply that those feelings and experiences of having to keep sharing and sharing and sharing.
It echoes other work that folks doing similar work to what we're doing are saying across the country, which is that there's a really cyclical nature to reform efforts often many reform efforts for systems that are really harming people are just a dance of a little more resources, a little less resources, a little more resources, a little less resources, and there's not actually a lot of substantive change to the way that things happen. And some folks propose alternatives to that cycle of just constant reform over and over again, being that we aim for our ideal horizon and then all steps on the way have to align with that ideal vision. So like this is part of the visioning. What would the ideal community look like? And we're not going to do any reforms that like don't move toward that goal, right? That the reforms become steps toward a world where no one is harmed by support, to a world where we are able to take care of each other. We have abundance of resources for everyone and no one's hoarding resources, right? Like whatever these visions are, that all of our change is in steps that lead to that, and that we don't go backwards, forwards with these little micro reforms that don't do enough. And I've been trying to hold that loosely as I hear people share, because I want our work to be effective, right? One of our agreements is that we're going to produce outcomes that are real. And we don't have a predetermined idea yet of what those are. We're trying to authentically listen, but in that real listening, I'm holding that goal of making so that any of our recommendations are steps toward those ideals that we are hearing as very consistent themes across community. It's not my idea or any one committee member's idea. These are like really strong themes that we're hearing. So I'm really grateful for y'all sharing. I think we should take a 5-minute break. Does that sound all right with everybody? We'll be back in 5. Okay. Welcome back to Brattleboro Safety Community Safety Review Project's Open Mic Night, which is really turning out to be a public forum, but Shay sang a weird song at the beginning, but it's cool. It's cool. I'm not mad about it.
We loved it.
Some of us loved it. It's okay. Some people might have been really, taken aback or a little uncomfortable even, which is fine. Discomfort's fine.
Love it. That's the whole point. We need everyone to be willing to get uncomfortable.
Yeah. With
right?
My voice.
That's what this is all about. Stop pretending you're not uncomfortable, people, because everyone is. We just have to talk about it.
I love that. Is anybody feeling like they have any creative, beautiful visions about safety for all people in our community, or any experiences with carceral systems or community safety systems that they want to share? Okay, I'll go. It's not going to be another screaming song. It's just going to be words. I think I want to share a little bit about what brings me to do this work, and then a little bit of visioning, but I think my job mostly here is just to listen to the visions of other people, which I really appreciate. What brings me to do this work is many, many things, a lifetime of experiences. But I will say that I grew up far away from here, and in a white family in an under-policed neighborhood in the semi-rural Midwest. And yet I experienced some interaction with many different what I would call carceral or prison-related systems. As a young person, there was very small amount of what we call here DCF involvement in my life as a young person. And that involvement led to no support for anyone and everyone walking on eggshells and lying in order to like make things feel as okay as possible. And that was my sort of first experience of the state in our lives. And later I had a sibling who experienced struggle with addiction and other things, who was in and out of the system very consistently, and did a lot of visiting of youth and then adult jails and prisons as a sibling for a long time, and witnessed what I experienced was more trauma and less healing, and therefore more struggle with addiction and less peace and healing the more times that happened. And as an adult, my community included many people who had all kinds of experiences and struggles. And I did work in lots of different kinds of social services and supported a lot of people who had involvement with the system. Most of those people felt like that involvement left them worse off. In my work as a domestic and sexual violence crisis worker, I supported people in doing exams after violent encounters at the hospital when those folks were incarcerated. And so their exams happened in shackles. I experienced just a lot of witnessing of people not wanting to engage with the system at all because it didn't feel safe or like it would make them safer, or because they didn't want their partner to be punished. They wanted it to stop. They wanted violence to end, but were worried about the other consequences for themselves or the person who was harming them, or consequences on their children for becoming system involved, basically. And I also had an experience that's a little hard to share about a friend in addiction, which I'll just say for all those small ears and big ears in this space, which was that a person who, I lived in a big collective house at some point in my early 20s, and one of our housemates was struggling with substance use. And we were all trying to support that person and like getting him into treatment and doing all the things that I thought I needed to do at that time. I had less knowledge and experience than I do now about what good support looks like. And eventually that person died, and I found them in our home in Brattleboro. And the police, responded. And I think probably assumed that I was also a heroin user, which I was not. But I was treated with what I assume is the amount of stigma that many heroin users are treated with most of the time, which was a window to me into a tiny piece of what that experience might look like, which was that they were pretty rough with me in my shock and the worst moment of my life, which was finding my dear friend dead in my house. And then also I've done a lot of learning about alternative ways of supporting people over time, whether that's through learning in things like intentional peer support, which is like an alternative to the way that the mental health system often treats people, or in transformative justice, which is an alternative to the way that police often treat survivors. I just have been trying to learn about other ways of supporting people that might introduce less harm. And that's where my interest in this work comes from, is reducing harm. And I think that I'm just listening to folks and really listening openly to people's experiences. And most of the people sharing feel like there's significant added harm to the ways that the community is currently set up to respond to difficult situations. So in the visioning category for me, I'm really excited about some of what happens in Vermont as compared to the Midwest where I grew up. There's some really cool things that are already seeded here. It seems like I was so surprised when I moved here to learn that restorative justice was part of the state system, for example. That's not common everywhere. It also is happening outside of the state system as well. There are people who are doing that kind of work privately, but that there's so much openness here to some alternatives is actually quite inspiring to me. You know, Malika shared earlier that she runs a peer support program inside of a local mental health agency. So these sort of alternatives are actually woven in some ways into the existing system. So I see a lot of potential in this area for change inside and outside of those systems. And for me, I envision a community where we have enough resources to support each other when we are in good times and bad times. Sounds really simple. Some ways that's already happening are like food shelves and mutual aid, and people like in smaller neighborhood communities learning about restorative practices and learning about bystander intervention and learning about how to support people who are in abusive relationships and learning about healthy relationships and consent and learning about gender and racism and the systems of oppression that lead to more violence. My real dream is that we can have ways of responding to stressful situations that don't add harm. And the harm that this process sort of responded to was like a national moment of reckoning with police brutality. And that is absolutely relevant in Brattleboro. And also in doing this and keeping the scope broad of this project, we're listening to a lot of other harms that are added as well, in addition to police brutality. Like psych system brutality, essentially. Some torture is happening in that system or some other systems, right? And so more resources that are less likely for people to just have legitimate fear around what could happen to them if they reach out for those resources is a beautiful dream. And we'll see what we can do to support the community and in reducing harm, I think, as part of this project. But those sort of harms that I've seen in my life experience have brought me to have that as a personal goal, to reduce the harm of the ways that we support each other, obviously. Yeah, and I will close by sharing another personal experience, which is a little hard to share, which I have permission to share, which is that one of my family members experienced very deadly violence from a partner in the last several years, and that ex-partner is now incarcerated. But the way that the system works for so many people is that safety is conditional and temporary, and actually the person's my family member's fear is that the system is causing much more harm and trauma to that person while they're there, their abuser, and that the moment that person gets out, they're at a worse place than they were before. They didn't want that to happen. It was a kind of coerced process. Their rights weren't respected, and it was a really, really negative process for them. And even the solution that the system has, which is incarceration, is absolutely incomplete and adding more harm to that person, to the survivor and the abuser in that situation. And that's pretty common. And we're lucky in Vermont in some ways that we have a really progressive state's attorney, and we have really, like, you know, some systems that are more connected than they are in other parts of the country, but there's a long way to go, I think, in terms of making sure that everyone can be held safely and that harm can be transformed and healed, and that trauma can be healed in the systems that are causing pain to other people. So that's some of my what my vision is for community is more mutual aid, more support, and more alternatives to responses that will make people legitimately afraid. Kelsey.
Thank you for sharing, Shay.
Just want to give a moment in case anyone else is ready to put their hand up. I don't see anybody at the moment. So as I've already said, I'm going to sort of write my story out in full and share it with the committee in written form. And so I've been thinking about sort of what little slice I wanted to share tonight. And there are a couple things. Some of it is related to some of what Shay just said. So as a survivor of intimate partner violence, my ex-partner is currently incarcerated. Those thoughts definitely go through my mind of, you know, I mean, he already experienced a lot of trauma in his life, and that's certainly not an excuse and doesn't justify the harm that he's caused to me and many, many other people. But he's certainly experiencing more harm by being incarcerated. And it certainly isn't, you know, I actually had to advocate pretty hard for him to be held accountable. But it's not out of retribution, right? It's like, it's not a, yay, I won, you know, he needs to suffer and pay by any means, because it's not a win. He certainly isn't going to come out rehabilitated. And when he is released, I'm going to have a safety plan in place for that, because there's no way for me to know what the outcome is. I mean, he having to have more sort of intensive programming because he will be incarcerated. It's more likely that he'll do it, so he'll have to, versus if he was out, less likely to engage. But I do want to say, when you think about domestic violence and incarceration, it's so complicated, because there are certainly in BIPOC communities for a long time, people are speaking of that this doesn't work for us, right? Like for so many families, you're ripping apart economic stability, all kinds of resources, and you know, finding it's generationally the impact, and it's not what primarily women are wanting and needing, and it's not solving the problem. And I recognize that. But it is so complex, and we do need to listen to survivors of what we need. And, you know, in my situation, there was no alternative. You know, I believe me, in my particular situation, this person is so willing to acknowledge that they need help and even engage in treatment, right? And it just enough to be believable. But in reality, I'm really confident in saying absolutely no willingness or desire to change, none. And, you know, there is no option, it does not exist for family or natural supports to be called when this person is escalating. That is not a solution. That is not safe, and it doesn't exist. It is not an option to call a neighbor to come over and de-escalate. It actually makes it more unsafe. You know, and I've tried some of these things, tried a lot of these things. And this person, again, depending on how desperate, will engage to the extent that it's believable for a period of time until this person can no longer maintain it. So taking away, you know, yes, certainly engaging with police, calling the police, it is awful process. It is a last resort. From my experience, the impact, the shame, the ripple effect on my professional, social reputation, my children in their school experience shame. I mean, it just, already what I'm had to rebuild and continue to rebuild was magnified to such a degree because of police involvement, because of mistakes made, simply because of the desperate need for a paradigm shift around, victims of domestic violence. I mean, there's so many layers to it. However, I could tell you, I still to this day, as much as I do value and I do want to look for alternatives, I need to be able to call 911, and I need that officer to have the ability to use force. I'm not saying I have an idea of what that force should look like, but it is life-threatening terror, and there is no talking that person down. I need him to be taken away in handcuffs in a cruiser. Like, that's what needs to happen. And I just, in order for that person to restorative justice, I firmly believe in it. And I think we need to grow and build and foster that as much as possible in as many ways as possible. When we think about certain individuals that have for so many reasons gone in so far into that direction, maybe if we're recognizing these patterns in people when they're still in their teen years, there could be strong interventions. But once you get too far into it, it's terrifying to me. And I do not believe that it would have any effect. And there is no restoring the damage that he's caused. So, and I have no faith that he will not continue to go on and hurt others. And holding him accountable as much as possible, I have found, is the only mechanism I have to keep him away. In fact, no charge, no court order, no relief from abuse order stopped him. What stopped him is when I started reporting him for non-emergency violations. So when I was ready to report him for text messages, video messages, phone calls, drive-bys, when I started reporting those pieces, even though, believe me, I had to fight really hard for the police to follow through, and that's a big part of my story. That's what finally got him to stop. That and moving. So I don't, again, it's not out of retribution. It's not that I think it's going to change him, but the more that is on his record, sadly, he'll be held accountable. There will be firmer actions for the future victims. And again, it's the only way that I have found that I can strongly send the message, no matter how small of an attempt, I will report you. So I so value all of this work, and I continue to want to learn and understand other solutions. And I want other solutions to be available for women that this isn't the answer. And I would like to believe, what we really need is a huge societal shift around gender roles and so many pieces, right? Like, we need to be pouring so much funding into preventing this problem. Absolutely. In the meantime, I need to maintain my ability to call for help. So I wanted to speak on that. It's so complex. Any hands up? Not yet. Please don't wait to raise your hand because I'm talking. The other thing I really wanted to speak about, again, I can't go through all the twists and turns of my story in this format, but I will in writing, is the two officers, we've had, I want to say 6 just in 2020 of officers in Vermont with domestic and sexual violence charges. But we've had 2 that were Brattleboro Police Department officers just in 2020. And both were currently in the department while I was, dealing with my situation. Neither of them were involved in my situation. But what I want to speak to around that is not, I certainly don't want to portray that sort of narrative that it's, because they're police officers, they're abusers, and all police officers must have that propensity. That's certainly not why I'm bringing this up. What I really want to bring up is thinking about press releases and our community paradigm around what supports survivors, because for so many reasons, I will say our system of press releases, which after speaking to the chief and doing research, they're not required to do the sort of press releases that they do. It's sort of what the town has desired, and that's why they do it. But they're required to state, to let the public know sort of what arrests are happening, how they're happening, but they don't have to put in the newspaper and on Facebook, this address, this perpetrator, this thing happened. So it is something we can change, number one. Number two, so press releases, even if you keep the victim's name out of it, it's a small community. It does absolutely nothing. So the impact on survivors and also perpetrators of that, it's just a process of shaming, right? And it really just compounds the problem. It certainly doesn't help survivors. It definitely doesn't keep perpetrators from going on and reoffending. If anything, you're compounding more shame. So it's not, and I'm not sure, you're not protecting the community from anything. So I don't understand that process. And I really want to articulate how harmful it is to the extent that my 2 children were shamed at school by staff members. And it was simply, they didn't intend to cause harm, but it's like, I read about this on Facebook. Completely, just so the impact of social media and how easy it is for us to latch onto information and speculate. And usually, what we read in the newspaper can't possibly really capture what's gone on. And for us, it's our personal nightmare, right? So there's that. But what I really want to bring up is, again, with those 2 police officers, there were very detailed articles and tellings about the reports made against those officers. Such specific detail of what those women reported. And I can tell you, I felt like I was going to throw up when I read the most recent one. Again, not because it was a police officer, but the fact that, yes, certainly right now, especially, the public wants transparency of when any time a police officer does anything wrong. I absolutely understand that. But to not have any understanding of what that did to those women, does not matter that they didn't include their names. The amount of detail, as if the public has a right to read those things. I've lived it. I don't know those women's names. I wouldn't know if I was standing next to them in the grocery store. But as I have said to Chief Fitzgerald, I stand with them because I have lived it, unbelievably violating. And basically what the community does by putting that information out there, they're picking up the torch for the abuser. It is gut-wrenching to have to continue to every day go out into the world, continue to grocery shop, bring your children to school, go to work, pray you get through the day where people don't ask you questions. Usually they don't because it's too uncomfortable, but they're all thinking about it, right? It is unbelievably violating. And for me, what makes me angry is that our police department, they are supposedly trained, right? They supposedly understand the complexity of domestic violence. We do need them to be the initial response quite often. So to not, to be willing and able to recognize and put out public statements and demonstrations about Black Lives Matter and what went on with George Floyd, I fully respect and value, but to not make any sort of public acknowledgement of the impact that those releases had on the survivors, on the community. How can we possibly feel comfortable and safe calling for help and not knowing, by not putting out a public statement, not specifically about those instances, but just about their stance on domestic violence, that silence communicates what their stand is. The stand is, it's a personal problem. We will respond because it's our job, but it's a personal problem and we're not going to pass judgment on it. And to me, that's just unacceptable. It's possible to not speak about those specific situations as they are legal, and I understand they can't, but to also speak about their commitment to supporting survivors. So I don't know, there's no way for me to get my words to those women, but I would like to apologize to them publicly. And I hope so much we can do better by survivors in this community in that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelsey, for sharing with us.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. I also want to clarify for you and everyone that I know very clearly that restorative justice, transformative justice, all these like alternative ways of handling things on the front or back end are different than the moment of unsafety. And that I know that the police are the only choice in the moment of unsafety for so many people, whether or not they feel good about that. And that I talk about these like other possibilities, but I in no way ever want to place blame on people for using the resources that we have in the times of need that we have. And I think it is important for us to make more resources for survivors and not less. And I, you know, through my work in supporting survivors, through my life as a survivor, and through relationships and community with so many other survivors, really want to name that it is not anyone of those people's fault who are experiencing violence, that there is also violence in the systems, that cannot be put on survivors. And that is a common problem in this field of like looking at these systems. It is not the fault of the person who does not know where else to call, of course, to call and use the resources that they have to be able to stay alive, right? And I really want to name that. I don't think that those are connected to that moment. I think that there's plenty of ways for us to think about healing the whole system. And it's our job to do that in some ways and be really visionary about that. And also there are moments of crisis where there's a lot of world building that we will have to do before there's an alternative for that moment for most people, right? And some people are building those alternatives. That is happening places, but I don't know of any projects in Brattleboro, Vermont, where there's a squad that's ready to show up to a moment of violence. That's not the police. And that's a really important thing for survivors to stay alive. So I honor that part of your story. And I really want to clarify to you that even though I've talked about these like other possibilities, that's not in any way any judgment about those choices in the moment of needing to stay safe.
Jay, you're always so articulate and clear that I don't think it came across in that way at all, but thank you.
Are there other folks who would like to share? Hey, there's a hand. Jillian, you're up.
Thank you. I'm gonna be honest right now, like my heart is in my stomach. And I don't know how to say any of this without I don't even know. I'm really struggling right now. I'm gonna speak on just how I'm feeling after some of what was just said, and I'm hoping that I don't inflict further harm in sharing this, but I'm feeling harmed right now. And it has to do with being, I don't know, it's a really complex space to be in because I understand the needs that were expressed just a moment ago. And I very much do believe that survivors need more support. And I understand that the message was not meant to be a dismissal of the restorative justice efforts or the need for that as well. But being in this space, as a person of color who has had the police used against me, who has been assaulted by the police, who could never consider them my protector. It's hard to be in spaces again, like Tara had said earlier, I am tired. I'm only 30 years old, and the amount of spaces that I've been in, and especially in Vermont, the amount of predominantly white spaces that I've been in, where we're looking at ways to try and create more community support to address public safety concerns, and then to still have to sit in there and listen to someone talk about the police in a way where it's so clear that their experiences with them are just the polar opposite of what myself and my community experience. It's hard. It's hard to hear that. And I 100%, I just want to say, like, I know none of that was meant to be harmful. I know that this is a person with good intentions who needed to express what they needed to express. And there are very legitimate concerns in there and legitimate reasons for being able to consider them this type of support. And I still feel very strongly that need to express that it felt harmful to have to sit in a space again and listen to that. It just did. I had some things like before, because I did speak at the public forum, and I knew that this one was an open mic, which I was excited to potentially hear some more of the creative pieces coming from members in the community. And I myself like to write. It's definitely been a major form of self-expression, and I think has helped in a lot of healing ways and helped me connect with others. And I looked through my poems, and I had thought before about writing something, and I just hadn't written anything in time. And I looked through my poems, and I didn't find anything that was quite hitting the mark for me. And I just thought I would listen more. And then I started to write something before the break because it was about visions. And I started to piece something together. And then just a moment ago, I was like, nope, I don't want to share that anymore in this space. Like, this space doesn't feel like that, feels performative. That feels like I'm trying to give some beautiful light thing when none of this is light. You know, and I know we're trying to reach that space, but it's like we're not there. And it's so tiring to be in spaces and share these vulnerable aspects of our life stories and our experiences, and know that sometimes, no matter how much action is taken, like we're still just not going to be anywhere closer to that point to where our traumas are healed, or that like those who come after us aren't still enduring the same traumas. And I don't want to be hopeless right now. I really don't. So I apologize if that's, the message and the tone that this is sending. I'm hurt. And I'm hurt from continuously being hurt. And in the spaces with the people who I know mean well and want to make these changes. But there's still this disconnect. And there's still this lack of understanding. And then like, even on I feel like I'm also being that person who's lacking that understanding, because I'm not this other person with those experiences, with those needs. And I don't want to be that either. And so I think just overall, I do hope everyone listened to each other. I do hope that something comes from this, even honestly, if it's just more connection amongst ourselves, so that when we're seeing each other and around each other and in these shared spaces again, we can have that level of understanding and respect and honor each other with all of our differences. And sometimes that's hard and sometimes it hurts, but I still think through that there can come more connection and love. And I don't know. I had a whole separate thing now. So one of the poems that I was thinking of potentially sharing, but I don't think I'm going to. I was going to talk some about how the types of harms, like I think we've heard some common things come up. Power imbalances, police structures, support for those in the community, the type of support that is around mental health. The retreat has been named many times. BIPOC have shared that, you know, it's like one of the only places they feel supported is the root. We've talked about racial profiling and domestic assault, and all of those need to be addressed. And then at the same time, I think that there's some other kind of more nuanced aspects of community safety that aren't necessarily always talked about in these spaces. And one thing that one of these poems kicked up for me, and it does have to do with being BIPOC, is it's a poem that I titled, I have a couple of a series, and this one's just called Middle School Spanish. And in it, I share how painful and how middle school Spanish was not a space for me because it was being taught to me by a Korean woman to all of my white peers, as I am a transnational Latina adoptee who lost my language after I was adopted because my adoptive parents, because the system, the US system, doesn't care to have the wealthier white adoptive parents honor the culture and heritage that their transracial adopted children are coming from or have. And I looked up, because I didn't attend middle school in Brattleboro or high school, and I didn't actually look at the middle school, but I did look up the high school, and this is just based on a physical, this is my judgment, my assumption, so I do not actually know. I do not know the identities of these teachers. But from my assumption, I am looking at white faces who are teaching these languages. And I wonder if there are other students, other Latinx students in these classes who are feeling that same level of harm and having to learn part of their identity and their culture from somebody, from a white person who has the freedom to claim it when it was robbed from them. And like, that's something, that is something, that is harm that people in this community are feeling that isn't always talked about. Not having others who you can connect with and identify with, and having to learn about yourself through others who don't have that same relationship to it. I know I have spoken for some time. I did not finish this, so it's still a work in progress, I guess, but actually I kind of have changed my mind some about sharing the vision, if there is still space and time for me to do that. But I know I have spoken for some time, so.
There's more time, Jillian. Thank you. Yep, go for it.
And thank you for allowing me to come in and express this. And that was pretty raw and vulnerable and like in the moment. And I really, really, really do want to clarify, I'm not trying to cause more harm myself. And I apologize if I did. And I do want to honor the truths and experiences and needs of everyone else in this room. Really do.
I'm grateful that you're sharing where you're at, and these conversations do have the potential to cause more harm. So naming that is valid to me, and I'm grateful.
And Jillian, I just wanted to say, I absolutely am so grateful that you spoke up too. And I do know that when I share my perspective and is my story as a survivor, that it is conflicting for a lot of what we're talking about. And I want to honor that, absolutely. So certainly does not cause me more harm. And I am sorry that it had that impact on you. While I still feel it's important to share my experience, I certainly really respect and honor that you share yours too.
Thank you so much. Genuinely, thank you. And I agree that you absolutely, it is important for you to be able to share your experience as well. So yeah, so this is just what I kind of wrote after the break and in between. and we'll see if anything more comes of it or not. I have many unfinished pieces. So it kind of started as a question, because I think it was like envisioning the town and the safety of the town and what that could look like. And so it's a lot of questions in here, really. But here it goes. So what if Brattleboro was a town where not a single person in need of mental health support was terrified of returning to the retreat or traumatized by their time inside? What if Brattleboro was a town where instead of being put away many times against their will, people were provided the type of community support that allowed them to stay in their homes, safe in their own beds? What if in Brattleboro, beds were provided to all who don't have them, without judgment on their appearances or past, instead just loving helping hands and fresh hot meals? What if in Brattleboro those beds became homes free of charge? And the homes that are rented aren't forcing people into poverty? What if instead of fearing evictions, we celebrated spaces and community relief for all, whether we are in a pandemic or not, because even under normal circumstances, too many of us still suffer? What if the people of color in Brattleboro didn't ever have to fear being profiled, targeted, harassed, assaulted, or even murdered by police? Because instead of a system built from literal slave catchers, we had community responders made up of all of us. What if BIPOC in Brattleboro could share their stories of harm without having to experience white denialism, pity, or inaction? What if Brattleboro was a town where the BIPOC were equal in all places of power and had just as much say as white people, if not more, in making decisions and implementing policies that impact us all? What if differently abled people didn't have to speak up when they weren't granted equal access to buildings, places, and spaces because they never had those experiences, and instead were always considered so they'd be included and safe, and they too had those positions of power? What if families weren't torn apart through a system that is punitive, and instead every parent and child in need of support received it compassionately in a form that honored the good in them and helped bring that out until together the family thrived? What if the people of Brattleboro recognize that harm is more than the extreme brute violence we see depicted across the nation and in ways that so many deny exist here? What if the town of Brattleboro accepted, honored, and celebrated people of all identities, whether they understood them or not? What if no child or adult had to fear sharing their gender identity or the rejection of the gender binary because they know that they would still be loved and welcome for who they are? What if no child or adult had to live in shame and guilt for being attracted to anyone other than the opposite sex because they knew that their family and loved ones and even the strangers in Brattleboro will accept and love them just the same? What if the children of color in Brattleboro got to learn about their culture, their heritage, their language, their food from people who share in their identities instead of white people who had the privilege of claiming ownership of a culture that was robbed or denied of those youth? What if Brattleboro was a town that made everyone feel at home because we all are heard, loved, honored, and cherished? What if? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jillian. And I'm so glad you shared those visions because they're such a crystallization of so many important things that you're bringing to us. And I also just want to note that in all of your sharing, like, you know, I'm reminded of our agreements at the beginning of this space and just the work we have to do as a community to create more space for all of the experiences. We can't talk about accountability without talking about hurt and harm. So I just thank you for your bravery and for your rawness and for being here. Yeah, I know.
thanks for helping us to hold it. Jillian just said thanks for holding the space in the chat.
Tara.
And yeah.
Sorry, a little tech, my plant. Sorry, a little technical difficulty there. Thank you, Jillian, for speaking up and speaking your truth to power there, power in this perceived by a member of the committee holding that opinion. So thank you so much, Jillian. I respect your brave soul and showing up in this space consistently. And I love you, Jillian. It didn't sit well with me either. And I just want to speak to that a little bit, but speak to it about how it speaks to what structure we're talking about. Okay, the structure is a structure that I can't say this word, dehumanizes so many of us, including the cops working in the system. You know, you have to separate yourself from your own humanity to do a job. Okay, and that's what many, I perceive many police officers might have to do to complete their duties, to separate themselves from their communities. I happen to do some work with Resma Menicum, my grandfather's hands, who looks at what, the identities of both, of white folks, of BIPOC folks, and of what he's saying, blue people, being people who work in the police system. And it really is, and I really appreciate Emily and Shay for focusing on somatic experiencing, is because we really need to get into our bodies to understand our experiences as humans. And I think that if all people were to get deep into our bodies, we would realize that how the police instruction was first established and it's continued to run is by separating ourselves from our humanity. And so one thing, just one of the key learnings in this book I'll read, rememberings. For the past several decades, policing in America has routinely meant targeting, accosting, searching, convicting, incarcerating, shooting, and killing large numbers of Black bodies. This dynamic will not fundamentally change until you and other police officers consistently recognize Black bodies, lives, and communities as human bodies, lives, and communities. Community policing is not a philosophy or an idea. It is a set of ongoing actions that involve making your body a part of the community and then wholeheartedly serving, protecting, and assisting the people in that community. It really is speaking about really getting into the body experience, being part and felt, that sense of belonging. It also means like the police feeling a sense of belonging in the community, whatever form it is, whatever we imagine. We can't stop that process of imagining, because we all want a better world for our generations, our next 7 generations, as the Indigenous folks says. We have to be thinking about that when we are planning on making recommendations. In the meantime, I am sorry that you experienced that, Kelsey, and those wives of those police officers. They are public servants. That is important information. Maybe not as much as the details, but that is important information for the public to have. Those survivors are victims of that system too. Why do police officers or people wearing uniforms resort to alcoholism, domestic violence? What are the causes of that? Is it I can't say that word, dehumanizing yourself in order to perform your job? That's a question I think we need to ask ourselves. And so, it's getting back to the humanity. So again, for visioning. Thank you so much, Jillian, for that poem, because it gets to the sense of belonging. You know, that was the essence that I heard, you know, a sense of belonging. So how do we get a sense of belonging for all in our community creatively with the suggestions that this board is going to put forth? So everyone is feeling a sense of safety, even those who now are in those positions of policing, and also maybe formerly, you know, in whatever structure is created in the future. We need to dream. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara, for sharing.
Thank you for bringing imagination into that space explicitly, Tara, especially I think what I was sharing earlier about sort of the steps that we take being in line with our big, big dreams is not possible without imagination. I'm really grateful.
So I'm going to go ahead and speak because my name was, you know, you're directly speaking to me, and I'll admit to you right now, I'm feeling a lot in my body. My heart is pounding and I'm feeling a lot of anger. I really don't appreciate perpetuating some really false narratives, such as domestic violence is related to, you know, someone being an alcoholic. There are plenty of alcoholics that are not abusers. I think, you know, really try to be careful and aware of the fact that my experience is of white privilege, and certainly don't ever want to speak of what it is to be a member of BIPOC community. But I am a survivor of violence in my home. And I have a very difficult, you know, I spoke Tuesday night about the experience of my 3-year-old accidentally calling emergency services. And, you know, folks had some responses to that. I understand in the scenario that it wasn't an emergency and we were a Black family, how my boys may have felt by that police presence is drastically different than my son being excited by these uniformed men. I totally recognize that difference in experience. It's huge disparity. Totally recognize it. However, if we were a Black family and my child did call 911 because I was being beaten in the other room or having a gun held to my head, and I picked up the phone to protect my child and said, we're fine here, everything's fine, because that's what I had to do to keep us hopefully from dying. I'm pretty sure that my Black son would be happy to see the police show up anyway. So this is my point. I recognize the disparity and what a huge issue it is, but there are a lot of complicating factors. And I saw there were letters to the editor over the summer suggesting that police officers experience PTSD and therefore things happen such as abusing their intimate partners. This is a narrative we really need to change. There are plenty of veterans, plenty of police officers do not go home and beat their partners. Plenty of substance users and alcoholics that do not beat their partners. Yes, it can exacerbate the issue, certainly, but this is a massive systemic issue, just like racism. And I feel a lot in my body when I hear members that are so fantastic and passionate and active in your movement. And it's beautiful and phenomenal, but please be careful in not perpetuating narratives that are false in other areas. And when I tell my story, I recognize it can be triggering because I have been treated differently. However, I was dismissed and left in a seriously dangerous situation for nearly 2 months because the police would not follow through, would not do the arrest, I was lied to, I was dismissed several times, and I had to live in fear. So I do not by any means think that this is a system that's working. And I have absolutely experienced discrimination for being a woman and being a survivor. But still, I recognize that my experience as a survivor, I've never had to face homelessness. My children have never been hungry, right? I've had built-in natural supports throughout the process that so many do not. So I recognize my privilege, but I want to name that I get extremely triggered when people speak about domestic violence that perpetuate some narratives that are very false. So thank you.
I'd like to just say thank you to everybody for tolerating and holding space for this discomfort and this dialogue. And this is, you know, we're calling in a willingness to be present with our community right now and the individual people in it, and holding space and time to hear and feel and hear and feel. Without speaking for anybody or clarifying what anybody was saying, what I want to acknowledge here is what already has been acknowledged to a large part too, which is the deep complexity of the conversations that we're talking about, and the varying different experiences and the intersections that really not only complicate further the conversation, but bring more of us and our histories into the conversations, and our lineages and our ancestors' history, which diverge at some point, and that's important. And I want to just name that. I was gonna myself reference Resma's book as well, Tara, because I think that what is so important about that work that Resma is doing is acknowledging that what we are doing to police officers by expecting police officers to hold the space in the way that they are being asked to hold the space right now. Good night, Marla. I think is also a part of this conversation, right? That needs to be had. And the statistics are very clear. I love you. About the way trauma and PTSD manifests in police, in police departments and in police bodies, as Resma Menniken says. So I think that needs to be brought in. I appreciate also, Kelsey, you know, like not compounding, wanting to not compound stories, right? And that's one of the hardest things about honoring the complexities is how do we take each piece in and feel the very, very understandable feelings, the anger, the rage, the straight up rage, the grief, the fear, all of it. We can't have this conversation without calling in space for those emotions. So I want everyone to take care of themselves. I want to leave space for others to share as we close here, but I just want to really see if we can sit with the complexity as well and just appreciate not putting on anybody what they should be feeling at any level, but I'm noticing in my breath the time that it takes to settle in my body as I'm allowing myself to hear the layers and layers of complexity. So I wanted to just take a pause through my sharing to allow for that sort of layers to settle and to acknowledge, Tara, the point about dehumanizing of police bodies is critical to this review. Absolutely critical. Something I heard something I have heard is we do the job that nobody else wants to do. If that's true, if that's people's perception of their job, why is it okay to put that on one person or one type of person or one institution? And this is one of the critical reasons why we call this, where we are framing this as a community safety review, not just a police review, because it's not just the police. The police are responding to things, but what are they responding to? Citizens are calling, neighbors are calling, we're calling the police to respond to situations, right? what would it look like? The neighborhood association idea, what would it look like if I was able to have the skills in my body and in my relationships to be able to consider responding to some circumstances that I might instinctively at this point call the police around, right? There's accountability all around in our community. And so I just want to name that because I want to bring that in, and we need to bring that into this review. It's critical. And everything everyone has shared tonight is critical, really essential to this work that we're doing. And I appreciate you all in showing up and being here for the hard stuff. Tara, I'm not sure if you were unmuted too, if you wanted to share.
No, I just wanted to say, I did not correlate both alcoholism to domestic violence. I recognize that speaking about, I don't know Kelsey, I don't know your situation personally. I'm speaking about what I know of the trauma that, as Emily explained, that is experienced from people in uniform positions or law enforcement, which is evidenced by the fact that the retreat had to have a special program for that. It's such a loss for our community that we don't have that any longer. So I appreciate Emily, you bringing it to the fact that everyone, it's so interconnected that all the pieces of the structure have to be addressed. And that's what's different. That's why I'm hopeful. I said earlier, and I was texting Jillian, was it wrong of me to say I'm exhausted? 2004 is it's 16 years ago. I stepped away from this work because it's exhausting for us, but what is different from this is that you're looking at it globally. This committee is looking at it globally. You're not just looking at the police force. You're looking at all those issues, a myriad of issues that contribute to the problems of why we're calling police. And unless we address all of those issues, we won't see change. I'm hopeful for that change. I need to be hopeful for that change for those seven generations. I'm grateful. And I think that, was it Chelsea? I wasn't looking at my camera when, sitting with that discomfort. That's how the work is done. If we can do that, then others can do that. We've made the commitment already, so, I hope that I appreciate what you said. I appreciate, you speaking up. We all need to speak from that. So thank you.
And I think I want to mention that folks have been doing generally a really good job of speaking from their own experience. And we've been asking folks to do that. Kelsey, I want to name it. The one place I didn't feel like that happened is when you said, if I had a black son, I feel like X, Y, and Z, and that really isn't your experience. But the rest of what you shared absolutely is your experience. And I've heard some pushback when you've shared bits of your story a couple of times. And I think that's because that resource doesn't feel available. You've said, I need to be able to call the police. People aren't able to do that. Other people are not able to safely do that. I keep hearing that in listening sessions. Many people in our community don't feel like you said about your friend who, was like, I cannot go to the retreat, right? That is the community support that's available. I cannot do it. That is not an option for me. And a lot of people feel that way about police right now. And so I hear why this feeling bubbles up, because your experience is your experience. And also many people apparently have conflicting experiences. We keep noticing a theme, I think. And I'm really grateful that folks are bringing that into the room, even though it's incredibly uncomfortable, especially because when we're in these spaces, we're sharing about the most intense moments of our lives. And I honor Kelsey about that. You're sharing about some really intense moments of your life. And it's hard to receive some contrasting feeling in that moment of people being like, that does not resonate with my life, right? But I also think without naming that dissonance in how people feel, we're not actually going to be very honest in our review about specifically racism and how racism plays into all these systems. And so even though, as Emily said, it's really challenging to hold all that in our bodies, I'm really grateful that everyone is doing our best to tolerate the discomfort of these really difficult conversations and be here, because change can't happen well or for long unless it's really honest. And unfortunately, being really honest about the pain is like a tax that we shouldn't have to pay, all of us who've been through stuff that we keep having to pay over and over to share our pains out so that change might happen. And my hope is that our work is that we can make some change happen so that it's worth it for all of us to be sharing these like big, heavy, intense feelings with each other. So thank you, everyone.
I just want to add in that too, that I'm a trauma therapist, and one of the things I say very often to folks that I'm working with is it's talk about simple, right? It's a step we forget, but naming how you're feeling is a way of expressing how you're feeling. Energy is literally leaving out through your mouth and out into the world. And I just so appreciate for the work you all have done to just name how you're feeling. And the fact that that's so raw and vulnerable is a problem with our society, not a problem with any individual. It's not a problem with you, right? It is a problem that, you know, we don't have more spaces that we can name our experiences and take the time that we need to take to be with them, right? The irony is the more we can hold them in, the longer they stay around. And I think about that with the experience I shared and what I observed is, wow, this person needed time. And this is how we spent that time, in shackles, unable to use the bathroom. Like, how do we want to spend the time with each other when things are really, really, really hard, right? And there's a lot of people that want to do that work, that want to sort of sit alongside people. So I'm grateful for all of you and those people who do that in our community already. And Shay is sharing some resources in the chat. These are other ways that you can connect and share your stories and your experiences and your feelings. We actually care about feelings, how you feel as well. That's important information.
And I shared those resources. I just want to say we're getting close to our ending time. For me, that can be a little bit flexible if there's still things that need to be resolved or we need to spend more time together. But there are other ways to share your voice in this process. But also, most importantly, I put our contact info there because Emily and I have both offered to either do emotional support ourselves or facilitate people in receiving emotional support in ways that feel safer to them. And if anybody from this intense conversation wants to reach out to connect about that, we are not wizards, but we are trying to facilitate connection and not aloneness through the bigness of this process. So our contact info is there. Emily and I share that email address. You can reach out there for support or just any ideas that you have. The phone number goes to a voicemail box that is attached to me. And the other links are just other ways that folks can share their thoughts and feelings in this process. There's a survey, anonymous survey in English, an anonymous survey in Spanish, and an organizational survey that asks what organization you work at, but it will be de-identified in the report. So nothing will come back and say, Shay's ice cream stand says that they blah, blah, blah at all. It'll be totally anonymized. And also I wanted to share that there are a few more places where we're open to hearing from folks between now and the end of our listening phase. There's a sort of approximately mental health themed listening session that Malika, who is in the chat, and Kaz, who's on our committee, are co-creating. More info about that will be available on our Facebook page, which I will link to also. We're probably going to be doing a youth listening project with some of the folks from Youth for Change. And if you want other ways to talk with us, just reach out to the contact info there, and we will keep your requests secret from everyone and just try to facilitate as much listening as possible. We have heard from so many people through the surveys, largely not a lot of one-on-one phone calls, understandably a few, with people who have experience of these systems, lots and lots of phone calls with people who work in organizations and in community support, and lots of survey responses, but we really are looking to hear from as many folks as we can before that phase is over. So please be in touch if you would like to, no pressure. I'm really, really grateful. I know it's hard, and I'm really grateful for you all. And I'm also open to feedback from folks if folks have ways of sharing how this type of space or process can be more supportive.
I'd like to offer to end, folks can just head out if you'd like, or I would like to offer a very brief grounding meditation for folks who would like to stay on for that. So feel free to leave whenever you'd like, but I'll offer a very brief practice to end if you'd like to. And before I do that, I'll just say thank you again. So you can turn your video camera off if you'd like. And if you want to stay on, I invite you to first keep your eyes open and just look around the room that you're in. Just really take a few moments to find the room around you and the breath in your body. And the breath doesn't need to be breathing in any particular way. Any way that the breath happens to be breathing right now is perfect for you right now. And you can either settle your gaze somewhere in the room, or you can close your eyes and settle the gaze inward. And if you'd like, you can bring one hand to the center of your chest, approximately around your heart center. You might be able to feel your heart beating underneath your hand. You might not. Both are fine. And now envision somebody that you like putting their hand on your back. So you can feel your hand on the front of your chest and somebody who you like's hand on the back of your chest. And see if you can feel the space in between the two hands. And if you can, you may not be able to, and that's fine. If you can, see if you can use your attention to gently settle the energy in between your hands in your chest. The exhale may offer some release, some letting go that might help settle. The inhale might offer some grounding, some connection to the earth through your feet or your seat that might help settle. See if you can allow the rising and falling of the breath to support a settling. And if you can't settle, that's fine. You're not ready to settle. No problem. And lastly, see if as you breathe and as if you feel the space in your chest, see if you can feel here in yourself the quality of love. The quality of yourself as love. And this doesn't have to do with anything or anybody. It just is. And if you can't feel it, that's all right. You take another breath here if you would like to. Sitting in the heart. And release the practice when you're ready. Thank you all so much for joining, and please reach out if you need to your own natural supports and or to Shay or I if you would like to be in touch with us. We're here.